This is my video update from Athens, Greece on this Saturday, midday, November the 11th. Let's talk about some news and let's start things off with French President Emmanuel Macron. He uh, he had he hosted a humanitarian aid conference for Gaza in Paris the other day. Ursula von der Crazy was in attendance at this humanitarian aid conference for Gaza. And Macron said some very interesting things during his statements at this conference. And he pretty much said the same things to the BBC during an interview that he gave the other day. And basically, Macron is now coming out and saying that while Israel has a right to defend itself and that France condemns the terror attacks from Hamas, Macron said that there is no justification. Those are the words that he used. No justification for the bombing of civilians in Gaza. Macron is calling for a ceasefire so that humanitarian aid, not a ceasefire, a pause. He's calling for a pause in the fighting so that humanitarian aid can be delivered to Gaza. And Macron also said that a pause in the fighting and an end to the war would be in the benefit of Israel. He said a ceasefire and a pause in the fighting would be to the benefit of Israel. So those are the statements from Macron. This is quite an Annalena 360 from the French president, because a couple of weeks ago he was in Israel, supporting a war and supporting escalation. And now he is saying that there's no justification for what is happening in Gaza. He actually told the BBC, and this is the title of the BBC's article from their interview with Macron. Macron calls on Israel to stop killing Gaza's women and babies. Israel must stop killing babies and women in Gaza, French President Emmanuel Macron has told the BBC. That is what he's told the BBC, the French president. Israel needs to stop killing Gaza's women and babies. So, no doubt about it, Macron is under immense pressure, not so much from the international world, from the global community, the Arab countries, the Muslim countries. I'm sure they are putting a lot of pressure on the European Union and especially France. But Macron is under an immense amount of pressure, more importantly from inside of France. I think it is the domestic pressure, the protests, and the outrage from inside of France, that is pushing Macron to change his stance on the war in Israel and in Gaza. And I am positive. I'm absolutely positive that Macron is going to receive a call from various neocons and powers that be, and they are going to tell Macron to stop talking about fighting pauses and ceasefires and stuff like that, and to not condemn the administration of Netanyahu. I am positive that Macron is going to get those calls, and I am positive that Macron is going to change his position in a week or two with regards to the war in Gaza and the bombing that is taking place in Gaza, because Macron always does this. he always flip flops and changes positions depending on polling and public opinion, and then depending on the phone calls and the orders that he gets from his globalist masters. So he's always flip flopping back and forth between different positions and policies, depending on where the pressure is coming from. He did this during the entire conflict in Ukraine. During at least the first year of the conflict in Ukraine, Macron would come out with statements like we need to talk to the Russians, we need to negotiate with the Russians. This war can't continue. We have to find a way towards a ceasefire because we're going to have to live next to the Russians and work with the Russians in the future. And then as he was making these statements, the next day Macron would come out and he would say that France is going to be delivering X amount of weapons to the Elensky regime because Putin must be defeated and Putin is an authoritarian dictator and Russia is evil. So this was Macron for about the first year of the conflict in Ukraine. I even remember Macron at one point in time saying that NATO is useless. And then like the next day he would come out with a statement saying that NATO is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and we have to give whatever money we have, we have to make it available to NATO. So this is typical Macron. That's what we're seeing right now. Very, very typical Macron. Either way, Netanyahu, he responded to these statements from Macron, and he basically told Macron to shut up and shove it. That's pretty much what Netanyahu told Macron. He said that Macron should direct his anger and his outrage and his calls for a pause in the fighting. He said that this should be directed at Hamas because Netanyahu, according to Netanyahu, it is Hamas that is using civilians as human shields, and Netanyahu said that Israel is trying to minimize the civilian casualties. Israel is doing its best to minimize the civilian casualties. That was basically Netanyahu's response to these statements from Macron. So we have protests in the United States as well taking place. Protests calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, specifically in New York. Those are the videos and the images that I saw this morning. Protests taking place in Manhattan at Columbus Circle. And these were fairly large protests, and they're calling for a ceasefire and for the bombing to stop in Gaza. But the bombing is not stopping, and we are seeing a lot of images of Palestinians in Gaza, hundreds, thousands of Palestinians moving from north to south, and those images are now making their way onto social media and the interwebs, and that's not good for the Biden White House, especially as the Biden White House prepares for their 2024 reelection campaign. So a lot of outrage and a lot of protests taking place in New York yesterday, and we even have various countries now um, uniting to call for the ICC to charge Netanyahu with war crimes. Algeria, I believe, was the first country to propose that the ICC charge Netanyahu with war crimes, and now we have Colombia saying that they are in support of this initiative from Algeria. And this is significant, not because Israel has an important relationship or a trade agreement or something like that with Colombia, but it's significant because Colombia is part of the collective West alliance. They are a U.S. ally, and so for Colombia, to break with the collective West and to say that they now want the ICC to charge Netanyahu with war crimes is, I think it's a significant move. Of course, the ICC is not going to do anything because the ICC is controlled by the United States. But that's an update there. And finally, before we move on to Project Ukraine, we have the Pentagon, the General Pat Ryder from the Pentagon in a press release outlining why the U.S. has so much military hardware parked in the Middle East and specifically in the Mediterranean. And General Pat Ryder said that the Pentagon has moved all of these military assets to the region for four reasons, for four priorities. And here are the four priorities. Number one, protection of U.S. forces and citizens in the region. Number two, the flow of critical security assistance to Israel as it defends against further Hamas attacks. Number three, coordination with the Israelis to help secure the release of hostages held by Hamas, to include American citizens. And number four, strengthening of force posture across the region to deter any state or non state actors from escalating the crisis beyond Gaza. And it's number four that is worrying. And it's number four that could lead to number five, which is in order to strike out at Hezbollah and possibly Iran. And that is the worrying part about all of the U.S. Military hardware that is now in the region, in the Mediterranean, including, from what I understand, a nuclear submarine is also now in the region, and two aircraft carrier strike groups as well are currently in the Mediterranean. And so the fear is that all of this U.S. military might will eventually be used for a conflict with Hezbollah, which would then lead to a conflict with Iran. And we do have fighting that is taking place now every single day between militias in the region. The U.S. says these are Iranian-backed militias, but militias in the region, in Syria and in Iraq, they are fighting with U.S. forces stationed in Iraq and the U.S. forces illegally occupying Syria. So it may not take much to trigger a wider conflict. Anyway, that is the Pentagon explaining their four reasons, their four priorities, actually, for having all of the forces that they have right now in the Middle East. Let's now shift gears and talk about the forgotten conflict, and that is Project Ukraine. And since we're talking about military hardware and weapons, let's talk about the EU's promise to deliver 1 million rounds of ammunition to Ukraine. Remember that promise? The EU said that they're going to pay EU member states to give up their ammunition to Ukraine, and they're going to fund the production of 1 million rounds of ammunition to be given to the Elensky regime so that they can counter Russia's production of what is believed to be 2 million rounds of ammunition a year, but many people believe that that number could be as high as 4 to 5 million rounds of ammunition every year that Russia is producing. And the EU, they pledged 1 million rounds of artillery ammo to Ukraine. Well, that promise was made, and that promise has been broken. According to Bloomberg, the EU says highly unlikely it will meet ammunition pledge to Ukraine The bloc had pledged 1 million rounds of artillery ammo. EU defense ministers will discuss the issue next week. The European Union informed member states that the bloc is very unlikely to hit a pledge to provide Ukraine with 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition, complicating Kiev's ability to keep pace with Russia's own production. Yeah. Maybe it's time for the European Union to start producing those washing machines and shovels that the Russian military is using so effectively in this conflict. Maybe they should stop trying to produce ammunition, and maybe it's time to start producing shovels. But yeah, that's the EU. They can't do it. They can't produce the 1 million rounds that they promised. Actually, I think that the EU has only delivered to date 30% of the 1 million that they have promised in artillery to Ukraine. 300,000. That's pretty much all Ukraine, all the EU can muster. 300,000 artillery artillery rounds. So yeah, bad news for the Elensky regime. An admission by the European Union that they don't have the ability, the production ability, the production capacity to produce 1 million rounds of ammunition. And it doesn't end there. It does not end with weapons. The EU is also having trouble securing money to the Elensky regime. I've talked about the 50 billion that the EU wants to send to the Elensky regime and how this 50 billion is being blocked by not only Hungary but also by Slovakia as well. And the EU, they have now decided that in order to bypass Hungary and Slovakia's block of the 50 billion in cash that they would like to send to the Elensky regime, they have thought up of another scheme to get money to the Elensky regime. And you know, Elensky, during his appearance on Meet the Press, he told the collective West, look, if you can't give me the cash, I take credit. Give it to us on a loan. And sure enough, the EU is now considering giving the money to Elensky on a loan, on credit. That's the plan, and they're doing this in order to bypass the block that Hungary and Slovakia have put on the 50 billion that they have earmarked for Project Ukraine. And so this, via Bloomberg, EU mulls alternative Ukraine funding plan to bypass Hungary veto. European Union countries are considering a backup plan to push through much needed aid for Ukraine in its fight to repel Russia in case Hungary vetoes the current 50 billion funding proposal. The proposal would involve national guarantees from member states to raise funding in the markets should Budapest block the review of the EU's long-term budget, which includes the package and requires unanimity according to people familiar with the discussions. This proposal that the EU is considering, this alternative that the EU is looking into, would involve national guarantees from member states to raise funding in the markets should Hungary block or veto the 50 billion. National guarantees from member states to raise funding. Eurobonds, Eurobonds, loans, credit, and the EU member states are going to go to the markets and they're going to guarantee these loans to the Elensky regime. Hungary and Slovakia, they could just sit this one out. They can say, nope, we're not going to guarantee euro bonds, loans, credits to Ukraine. We're not going to guarantee that. But other EU member states are going to be compelled. They're going to be forced to raise money and guarantee that this money, should something go wrong, that this money will come out of their pockets or their budget. That is the EU alternative plan that they are considering in order to get 50 billion to the Elensky regime. Keep in mind that this 50 billion that EU member states now will most likely have to provide national guarantees for to the markets. This 50 billion in funding is going to an Elensky regime that everyone has understood is losing and has lost this war. And yet the EU is so crazy. They're so obsessed with this project. They're so boxed in by this project. They're so trapped in this project and this narrative of Project Ukraine that they're going to now tell member states to go out and guarantee the loaning of money to Project Ukraine. Unfreaking believable. Unbelievable. Reuters is reporting that an EU cash plan for Ukraine may die. More cash for Ukraine. 20 billion euros in lethal aid for Ukraine. According to Reuters, a European Union proposal to send some 20 billion on lethal aid for Ukraine is facing pushback from some nations and was increasingly unlikely to survive in its current form, several diplomats have told Reuters. While the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has pushed for the 4-year spending initiative since July, multiple member states are not yet sold on the idea, reluctant to commit such significant funding so far in advance, the diplomatic staffer said. Germany has had a lot of questions, and rightfully so. We're talking about a lot of money, a senior European diplomat told Reuters on Friday. I'm not going to declare it dead at this point, but of course, improvements can always be made. This is 20 billion on top of the 50 billion. So 70 billion is what the European Union is trying, desperately trying, to get to the Elensky regime. A regime that is in its last days, and everyone knows that the Elensky regime is in its last days, but they still want to get 70 billion to it. Unbelievable. Well, Viktor Orban, he knows what's going on. He understands what's going on, and a very, very smart and very clever Viktor Orban. He is now positioning himself as the victor, Viktor Orban, as the victor in this going back and forth with funding for Project Ukraine, because it has been Hungary from day one, which has provided the only resistance. Now they have Slovakia, but it has been Hungary that has put up the only resistance towards the financial and military funding of Project Ukraine, and they have been the only country in the European Union since day one which has been consistently calling for peace and for a ceasefire. And now Viktor Orban, he is positioning himself as the I told you so guy. That is what he is positioning himself as, because Viktor Orban, he is now 100% positive that Ukraine has lost this conflict. And so every statement now from Viktor Orban is pretty much saying, we told you guys that Ukraine was going to lose this war. We told you guys that it is in the best interest of Europe to find a peaceful solution to this conflict and to call for a ceasefire. We told you guys that it doesn't matter how many weapons and how much money you give to Ukraine, that they're not going to defeat Russia. We told you guys that you're not going to get a regime change in Moscow. And he is saying this now over and over again. He's saying, we told you, and now look. And now look. the Elensky regime is crumbling, it's collapsing, and even collective West analysts and media outlets are pretty much admitting that Ukraine is losing this war and has lost this war. And yesterday, Viktor Orban, speaking with the radio Kossuth channel, agreed with former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder that it was the US that scuttled the Istanbul peace talks in March 2022. What the former German chancellor said is a well known fact in the world of diplomacy, Orban said. And we also know this from all kinds of reports and intelligence sources that indeed in 2022 in Istanbul, where all kinds of covert negotiations took place, there was essentially an agreement which, so says the diplomatic rumor, the Ukrainians did not sign on American instructions. Now, this agreement, according to Russian President Vladimir Putin, was signed, was initialed by the Ukrainian negotiators in Istanbul, and it was when Boris Johnson traveled to Kiev in the end of at the end of March, early April, that this agreement was then torn up because Boris Johnson, he told Elensky that the United States and the UK and the European Union, NATO, they were going to give Elensky anything and everything he needed in order to defeat Russia, and they were going to implement an economic sanctions war that was going to destroy the Russian economy and lead to regime change in Moscow, and Zelensky was going to be a hero. And so Boris Johnson, rumor has it, Boris Johnson, he told Zelensky, tear up that agreement and fight the Russians, and we've got your back for as long as it takes. And so, you have Orban basically confirming that there was an agreement in place in March. You also have former Prime Minister of Israel, Bennett, has also confirmed that there was an agreement put together in March to stop the conflict. And as I said, Putin actually showed the agreement. If you believe that that was the agreement, he actually showed the agreement to, I believe, a delegation of leaders from Africa that were visiting Russia at the time. So that was Orban's statement to this radio channel. Orban also said, the Americans entered this game, and since then the direction is not isolation and localization, but expansion. More and more people are getting involved, more and more weapons are being delivered, more and more money is being spent. The Europeans are taking out more and more loans and sending them over to Ukraine. So I have to say that the conflict is becoming globalized. The Russian-Ukrainian war is destroying Europe. What we are doing now is unsustainable. So, you know, Orban mentions loans. More and more loans are going to the Elensky regime. So, Elensky, he's an actor. He reads scripts. He delivers his lines. And so during Meet the Press, when Elensky said, if you don't have cash, I take credit, I take loans. Give me loans, give me credit. We're good for it. As Elensky delivers those lines, he's being told what to say. He's being told what to say. And so, the plan right now is give Ukraine money on loan, on credit, Euro bonds, whatever. just give them whatever money they need, and we'll figure out the payment, the payback afterwards, and you know where that payback's going to come from when Project Ukraine finally and fully collapses, and Russia is finally admitted to be victorious in this war, in this conflict. You know what the collective West is going to do. You know it. They're going to say, well, we've loaned Ukraine 300 billion. We're obviously not going to get that 300 billion back. BlackRock, Monsanto, we have all of these deals that we put in place for Ukraine. We have these MIC companies. What's the German company? Rhein's Metall. All these deals that have been signed as well to build manufacturing plants in Ukraine. So we're obviously not going to be doing that now that Russia has won this war and Russia is dictating terms. And we got to figure out a way to pay everybody back. And so, what are they going to do? They're going to take the 300 billion in frozen assets, and they're going to pocket that money, or they're going to give it to BlackRock and Monsanto, and everyone's going to get their cut. So that's obviously where all of this is heading. That is where all of this is heading. So Peskov, he made some interesting statements yesterday with regards to the sanctions that have been placed on Russia, and the Russians now are they're openly mocking the collective West now in their statements. At least Peskov is, and they're saying some pretty interesting things. Peskov the other day he said in a statement to a journalist, he said, "Look, the West, they just need to admit it. They're not going to beat Russia on the battlefield." He said it's over. You're not going to defeat Russia. Just admit it. Just come to terms with it and accept it. That's pretty much what Peskov said the other day, which is a pretty huge deal because Russia is usually very, very conservative when it comes to statements, especially about the conflict, the war, the progress of the war, and stuff like that. They usually do not come out with statements like what Peskov said unless they're 100% certain, absolutely confident that this thing is being wrapped up. And so that's what Peskov said the other day with regards to what is happening on the ground. And with regards to sanctions, Peskov said, "Many are beginning to see the light and understand that, firstly, the sanctions backfired on them, and secondly, turned out to be not so painful and pushed us to build up our own potential." In other words, Peskov is saying that Western sanctions, not so bad, not so bad. Well, that's a big statement from the Russian spokesman. A very, very big statement because sanctions for the United States, that's a huge tool that they use, a huge tool in their arsenal that they like to use in order to bring a country under their control, or in order to regime change a country or to punish a country. It's that sanctions tool that the U.S. loves to use so often. And now you have Peskov coming out and saying, U.S. sanctions, not so bad. Collective West sanctions, EU 12 sanctions packages, not so bad. It actually helped us to grow and to achieve this year 3% growth. So it's actually helped us. That's quite a statement from the Russian spokesman. Now let's do one more story, and we'll get to the clown world. And this is an update with what happened yesterday in Spain with Vidal-Quadras being shot in the face yesterday when he was speaking in Madrid. And from what I understand, he is going to make a full recovery. But I have more information on that assassination attempt. This is from The Guardian. Spanish police investigate possible Iran link to shooting a former politician. Alejandro Vidal-Quadras told police from hospital bed of his links to exiled Iranian opposition, source says. So yesterday, when I talked about this story, I was linking the assassination attempt on Vidal-Quadras to the Sanchez amnesty deal that happened yesterday. Well, it looks like that maybe, just maybe, this assassination attempt has nothing to do with this Sanchez amnesty deal, and maybe it is linked to Vidal-Quadras is links to the MEK, which is a pretty nasty regime change group. If I remember the MEK, if I remember these guys correctly, they're pretty nasty, and they're trying to get regime change in Iran, and it looks like Vidal-Quadras may have links to the MEK. The Guardian is reporting the Spanish right-wing politician Alejandro Vidal-Quadras is recovering in hospital after being shot in the face on a central Madrid street. Police said they were not ruling out any theories for the attack on Thursday afternoon, including a possible link to the former European lawmaker's ties with the Iranian opposition. A police source close to the investigation told the Associated Press there was no evidence backing the Iranian link, but confirmed that Vidal-Quadras himself had raised the suspicion from his hospital bed and that investigators were looking into it as one of several possible motives. So Vidal-Quadras, he was with the People's Party. Then he moved on in like 2000, I think like 2014, 2015, around that time, to start up Vox. He was one of the first members, the founding members of the right-wing party Vox, and then he ran for EU Parliament in 2014, 2015. He didn't win, and then he just kind of dropped out of politics. But rumor has it that he had very close ties to Iran's MEK, and rumor has it that he actually used funding from the MEK to start up the Vox party, to bootstrap the Vox political party. From The Guardian, Vidal-Quadras was a member of Spain's Conservative People's Party, its regional leader in Catalonia, and a European Parliament member before leaving after 3 decades when he fell out with the then Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy. After he broke away, he helped found the far-right Vox party. He left Vox shortly after a failed attempt to win a European Parliament seat in 2014. As part of his political career, Vidal-Quadras has been aligned for decades with the Iranian opposition in exile, an involvement that was noticed by Tehran. In January, the Iranian Foreign Ministry announced it had imposed sanctions on Vidal-Quadras along with others who had ties with the exiled People's Mujahideen of Iran, or the MEK, accusing them of supporting terrorism and terrorist groups. Wow. We really do live in incredible times, in very, very interesting times. So I'm not saying there is, but perhaps there might be some sort of MEK Iran thread to this assassination attempt of this former politician in Spain. And all of this happened at the same exact time when Sanchez found a way to remain in power by granting amnesty to two parties that were involved in Catalonia separatism from Spain. What an interesting story this is. Now, I'm not saying that it was Iran or Iran had something to do with this assassination attempt. I'm just reading to you what the Guardian is reporting, and various other outlets are indeed confirming that Vidal-Quadras in hospital said that there might be some Iranian link because he was getting money from a group that Iran considers to be a terrorist group, and the MEK. These aren't guys that you want to be aligned with. That's for sure. But anyway, let's get into a clown world, and this clown world once again is is Elensky and is about Project Ukraine. Actually, not so much Elensky, but Yermak. Elensky's like chief of. Is he the chief of staff? What is he? I think he's like the secretary to Elensky or something like that. The chief. Oh, he's the chief of staff. Okay, he is the chief of staff. Many people say that Yermak is actually the guy running the show. He's like the guy behind the curtain. I believe that Yermak was at one point in time he was Elensky's entertainment lawyer or something like that. Back when Elensky was a clown puppet comedian, it was Yermak who was his lawyer. So anyway, he's now his chief of staff, and everyone says that he's the real brains behind the Z-Man, behind the little green man. Anyway, he came out with a statement, and he said that Ukraine is not one of the world's most corrupt countries. Elensky is personally clean and does not tolerate graft, according to Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak. Ukraine is not the world's most corrupt nation or one of the most corrupt. This is not true, Andrei Yermak said when asked by journalist Natalia Mosichuk whether the problem had been brought up by Kiev's foreign sponsors. Yermak maintained that the country's leadership was graft-free and that Elensky personally had no tolerance for it in his inner circle. You know for sure that neither the president nor I am corrupt, Yermak said. I believe no one, unless they are paid to spread someone's fake news, would call our president corrupt, Yermak claimed. Yeah, sure. Elensky's not corrupt. No, no corruption. Corrupt. Nah. Nor are you, Yermak. You're definitely not corrupt. Nor was the former defense minister Reznikov. Nope, not corrupt. Podolyak, not corrupt. Zaluzhny, not corrupt. The AI android robot Budanov, not corrupt. No one is corrupt in the Ukraine government. And my response to these statements from Yermak, if you're so confident that there is no corruption in Ukraine, audit. Audit, audit, audit. That will prove once and for all that Ukraine is the least corrupt country in Europe. Audit. Let's see where all of those 200, 300, 400 billion dollars in euros went. Let's see what all that money was spent on. Let's have an audit. Boy, that Time magazine article that said what did that article say? That people are stealing like there's no tomorrow, something like that. Boy, that article really got under the skin of Elensky and Yermak and Podolyak and all these guys. It really, really bothered them because they know that if publications like Time magazine are saying how corrupt Ukraine is, that they're not going to get any more money. And if they don't get any more money, well, no more homes. All right, that's the video, everybody. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X. And go to the Duran shop. Use the code TheDuran20 and get 20% off all merch, including my Elensky green jacket that I'm wearing today. Nice mini church to complement the big church. All right, take care.